Welcome to Talk About Talk, episode number 139, Speaking Up and Communicating in Meetings. This is the 9th of the top 10 Talk About Talk episodes of all time. These are the 10 episodes of the over 130 episodes to date that have the most downloads. We're re-releasing these top 10, one after another, one every week. Then, in a few weeks, we're going back to our usual cadence of bi-weekly releases and new topics. This is a re-release of episode number 114 called Speak Up, Communicating in Meetings. And I know exactly why this episode has been so popular. It's because so many of us, probably most of us, have been told at one time or another that we need to speak up. Am I right? I remember when I was a young brand manager sitting in a meeting room with our advertising agency, along with my boss and my boss's boss and all sorts of people, knowing that I needed to say something, but feeling paralyzed. Many of my clients have shared similar stories. They tell me that their boss told them that they need to speak up. But it's not easy, is it? Whether you're looking for suggestions to help you speak up, or perhaps you're a manager, a leader who's encouraging your folks to speak up, the suggestions in this episode will help. I promise. I remember when I was in my 20s working as a young, ambitious brand manager at Kraft Foods. I'd be seated at a boardroom table, sometimes with a cross-functional team, or maybe with senior marketing executives, and perhaps with the ad agency. This happened many times, but I remember feeling a lot of pressure to say something, and more importantly, to say the right thing. The longer the meeting went on without me saying a word, the more stressful it became to interject. I needed to say something. My blood pressure was escalating every minute that went by. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps you're the one who's struggling to speak up in meetings, or perhaps you're the manager who's encouraging your direct report to speak up. Either way, you're going to learn a lot in this episode. Welcome to Talk About Talk, episode number 114, where we talk about speaking up in meetings. I'm going to share 10 different strategies to help you speak up in meetings.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Let me introduce myself. I'm your executive communication coach, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Please call me Andrea. I'm also the founder of Talk About Talk. If you're an ambitious executive with a growth mindset, well, then you're in the right place. You've probably spent years learning how to do your job, the technical skills. When you look at the successful folks around you, you might notice that what differentiates these successful people typically isn't their technical skills. Rather, it's their ability to confidently speak up. It's the clarity of their message. It's their communication. Now, it's time for you to up your game by focusing on your communication. And that's exactly what we're all about here at Talk About Talk. If you go to the talkabouttalk.com website, you'll find many resources to help you out. There are online courses, tip sheets, corporate workshops, one-on-one coaching, the archive of this bi-weekly podcast, and I really hope you'll sign up for the Talk About Talk communication coaching newsletter. This is your chance to get communication coaching from me every week. Please sign up for that newsletter if you haven't already. Something else you notice on the website, there's a button that says, Record your question for Andrea. I love hearing from you so much that I'm inviting you to record your communication skills questions for me. You might even hear your voice on a future episode. All right, let's get started. Speaking up. Let me start by saying this. Speaking up, being heard, contributing in meetings, however you want to label this phenomenon, it's very important. Of course it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be creating this podcast episode for you. But this topic comes up a lot with my coaching clients or when I'm doing corporate workshops. A lot of people struggle with getting up the nerve to contribute in meetings. Many of them have even been told that they need to speak up. So I created a list of 10 strategies for you to make it easier to speak up in a meeting. And if you're the manager of that person that needs to speak up, you can use these strategies to help encourage them. Now, I recognize 10 is a lot of strategies. If you've been listening to the Talk About Talk podcast, you probably know that I'm a huge fan of the power of 3. So you may be asking yourself, why is she sharing 10 strategies with us? Here's my challenge for you. Identify 2 or 3 of these strategies where you think you can get the most traction and then focus there. By the way, I created a 1-page summary sheet with each of these 10 suggestions or strategies. If you go to talkabouttalk.com/speak up, you'll find the 1-page summary there with all 10 strategies. I'm also going to repeat the 10 strategies I'll summarize at the end of the episode. So as always, you don't need to take notes. Just keep doing whatever you're doing. Driving, walking, housework, sitting on the couch, whatever you're doing. You don't need to take notes because I do that for you. I got you. You're welcome. Wait, why is this topic so important? Why is speaking up in meetings, being heard in meetings, such a big deal? Well, what's the purpose of a meeting? I'm not asking you about the meeting objective that's printed at the top of your meeting agenda, like status update or make a decision. I mean generally. Generally, why would you have a meeting? The answer is simple. A meeting is an exchange of ideas. A meeting is different from a one-way email or from a one-way formal presentation because there's discussion. There's an immediate exchange. Therefore, it's implied if you are invited to a meeting that you will contribute and share ideas. That's why meeting attendees are called participants. So that's one reason why speaking up is important. And second, at least as importantly, for your own sake, speaking up or contributing in meetings is an imperative because it's your opportunity to demonstrate leadership, to share what's on your mind, to articulate your value, ultimately to position yourself for advancement.
Yeah!
So there's a ton of upside to speaking up in meetings, but there's also a lot of pressure. I remember a few years ago being in a board meeting and suddenly realizing about an hour in that I had not said a word. The conversation in the meeting started getting technical and I started ruminating, questioning my value in the room, and I was completely distracted. So why is speaking up so difficult for so many of us? Well, maybe it's just that all these reasons why we should do so are simply overwhelming. The opportunity to demonstrate leadership, to share what's on our mind, to demonstrate our value and position ourselves for advancement, that's a lot. And maybe it's even more overwhelming depending on our cultural heritage, or if there's a language barrier, or a perceived language barrier. And sometimes minorities and introverts find it particularly challenging to speak up. Thinking back to when I was a 20-something brand manager at Kraft, or even later when I was in a board meeting, there was no language barrier for me. And I'm definitely not an introvert. I am a full-fledged extrovert. I get energized around other people, but I still definitely experienced this stress around speaking up in meetings. Why was it so stressful? Well, this is an easy one. I remember early in my career being so worried that I would say something categorically wrong, or maybe even just something that one of the senior executives didn't agree with. I remember a few times this scenario of being in a meeting with my boss and our advertising agency, and the agency folks would present their ideas for a new advertising campaign. And then we, brand managers, were supposed to respond. And I was simply terrified that I would say something that my boss disagreed with. And that's just one example of what was going on in my head when I hesitated to speak up at a meeting. Does that resonate at all with you? So what can we do about this? I've got 10 suggestions. Yes, 10. And as I said, I know 10 is way too many to remember. So as I'm going through this list, I challenge you to think about which 2 or 3 will personally help you to speak up in meetings. I've got a few suggestions for you about what to do before the meeting, a few suggestions related to your mindset during the meeting, and even a few suggestions for what to say, prompts, the words you can use in the meeting. All of this is outlined in the summary page that I created for you at talkabouttalk.com/speak up. And speak up is all one word. Okay, are you ready? Let's start with 3 things you can do before a meeting to help make it easier for you to speak up. Can you guess what number 1 is? I bet you can. It's prepare. As in, be better prepared for that meeting than anyone else in the room. Know the business, the people, the players, the context better than anyone else. Your preparation will fuel your confidence. And how could preparation not help you contribute to the meeting in a valuable way? Recently, I read a quote from Janet Yellen about preparation. She's the former U.S. Chair of the Federal Reserve, and currently she's the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. I can only imagine some of what she must have experienced as a female economist. Everyone scrutinizing her every word. Here's what Ms. Yellen says. Quote, "For me, being prepared is the most important thing. Fortify yourself by being as prepared and as knowledgeable as you possibly can. That works to bolster self-confidence. It certainly does for me. And that's what I do to this day. I do not wing it. I never wing it." End quote. Okay, Janet, we're on it. We will prepare and over-prepare for meetings. We will bolster our confidence. That's number 1. What else can you do in advance of the meeting? You can create a game plan. Look at the agenda. Think in advance about a comment that you can make. Maybe even practice that comment. If it's an online meeting, write it on a Post-it note and put it on your computer. If it's an in-person meeting, write it on the agenda or in your notebook. The third strategy for what you can do in advance of the meeting is to ask someone else in advance to ask you a question. Plant your comment. Script it in advance. With a little help from a trusted colleague, or maybe even with your boss. If your boss has encouraged you to speak up more in meetings, then depending on your relationship, you might share your hesitation to speak up and solicit their help in creating some space for you to talk. Before the meeting, you might tell them when in the agenda that you have some ideas to contribute and ask them to call on you. By the way, if you are the boss and you have a direct report whom you've been encouraging to speak up, this is a fantastic strategy for you to help them. You could ask them in advance of the meeting where in the agenda they might like to speak up. You could help them script in advance when they'd like to speak up and what they'd like to say. Okay, so those are the 3 things you can do before a meeting to help make it easier for you to speak up. Number 1 is prepare. Number 2 is to create a game plan and plan your comment. Number 3 is solicit someone else's help by asking them to ask you a question in the meeting. Script your comment. And over time, you won't need this scripting. Yes, it gets easier. Okay, now moving on to what to do during the meeting. Let's start with your mindset. The next strategy is to give yourself a quota. You've probably heard this one before. It is common advice. Challenge yourself to always make at least one comment in every meeting. Don't accept anything less from yourself. And keep in mind that the sooner in the meeting that you speak up, the easier it will be. I promise. It's way easier to say something at the beginning than it is to sit and stew. Otherwise, your rumination will likely build as the meeting progresses, making it harder and harder to speak up as the meeting progresses. Also, in terms of your mindset, think about managing your physical state to enable your mental state. Take slow, deep breaths, and in particular, slow the exhale. Research shows that this will lower your anxiety and optimize your physical and your mental state. Physically, you can also focus on being expansive. Take up lots of space. Convince others and convince yourself that you are confident. So when it comes to your mindset, you've set yourself a quota of a minimum of 1 comment per meeting, and you've committed to focusing on your physical state to optimize your mental state. One other thing you can do in terms of your mindset. Reframe your definition of contribution in meetings. Know that your idea doesn't have to be a breakthrough solution. Remember, a meeting is an exchange of ideas. One idea leads to another. Your minor comment might be the inspiration for someone else's breakthrough. So share your valuable ideas, even if they're half-baked. One last thing in terms of your mindset, it's this. Focus and listen. Focus on the topic at hand. Focus on the team. Listen to the team. Here's the thing. When you're truly listening and focusing in a meeting, you're not ruminating about when to speak up and what to say. Simply put, you're not focused on yourself. Rather, you're focused on the objective of the meeting, be it building the business, making a decision, pushing a project ahead, or choosing an advertising creative strategy for your brand. Remember the scenario I shared with you a few minutes ago, early in my career when I was in a meeting with my boss and the advertising agency. In retrospect, I was more focused on saying something my boss would agree with than I was in developing the advertising campaign that would build our business. Such a shame. I should have been focused on the topic at hand, not on myself. Do you get the idea? All right, so those are 4 strategies to help you speak up in meetings by focusing on your mindset. Number 1, give yourself a quota. Never less than 1 comment per meeting. Number 2, focus on your physical state to optimize your mental state. Number 3, reframe your definition of contribution in meetings to include even small suggestions. And number 4, focus and listen. Focus on the meeting objective and what others are saying, not on yourself. Now we're on to the last 3 strategies to help you speak up. And these are about the words you choose. This next strategy is simply remembering that your comment in a meeting could take the form of a question. Ask a question. You could ask someone to elaborate on or clarify something they said. Or you could ask someone in the room what their perspective is on something, given their expertise. Yes, asking a question is definitely considered speaking up. Also, in terms of the words you use, you could build on others' ideas. Here's your prompt. Building on what so-and-so said, I want to add this point. And if someone says something in a meeting that prompts an idea in your mind, jump on it. Say something like, based on what Joe said, I would add blah, blah, blah. Got it? All right, we're on to the last strategy, and this one is my absolute favorite. Of course, I saved the best for last. It's something that I've personally and purposefully done myself in meetings. Remember the story I told you about when I was in a board meeting and I realized that I hadn't said a word in the first hour of the meeting and I was questioning my value on the board? I used this last strategy then, and it worked. And I've also coached others to do the same. And dare I say, this is gold. It's this. Focus on your unique experience or expertise. Then say this. Based on my expertise, I want to add, and then make your point. When I was in that board meeting that I was telling you about, I raised my hand and I said, based on my expertise in brand strategy, I want to add this 1 point. The beauty of a comment like this is that you are reinforcing your personal brand in terms of your expertise. You are also being completely authentic, true to you. And because you're focusing on your unique expertise, of course, you are truly adding value to the meeting. Bam. And those are the 10 strategies to help you speak up in meetings. If you go to talkabouttalk.com/speak up, that's all one word, you can get a 1-pager with this list of the 10 strategies to help you speak up in meetings. I recognize you probably don't remember them all, so let me quickly summarize them here. Number 1, before the meeting, do as Janet Yellen does and prepare better than anyone else. Number 2, create a game plan in advance of the meeting. Maybe even prepare a comment in advance. Number 3, ask someone in the meeting, perhaps a trusted colleague or your boss, to ask you a question. Number 4, give yourself a quota, at least 1 comment per meeting. Number 5, in terms of your mindset during the meeting, manage your physical state to enable your mental state. Take slow, deep breaths and be expansive. Convince others and yourself that you are confident. Also, in terms of your mindset, know that your idea, your contribution, does not have to be a breakthrough. It could be a minor point. Yes, that counts. Number 7, during the meeting, Focus and listen. Think about the meeting objective and listen to others. Stop focusing on yourself. Number 8, challenge yourself to ask a question. Questions also count as speaking up. Number 9, explicitly build on others' ideas. Say something like, building on what so-and-so said, I want to add this. And last, number 10, my favorite strategy for speaking up in meetings. Make the comment in the context of your unique expertise or experience. Start your comment with, based on my experience, or based on my expertise, and ground your comment in a context where you know you can add value. And that's 10. I encourage you to look at this list carefully and then choose 2 or 3 strategies where you think you can get the most traction, and then try them out. One last reminder, there's a summary page that you can download easily if you go to talkabouttalk.com/speakup, and this list contains all 10 strategies. While you're on the talkabouttalk.com website, I hope you'll sign up for the communication skills newsletter that I was telling you about. That way, you'll get communication coaching from me every week in a simple to digest email. You'll also get reminders for recently released podcast episodes. All right, that's it for episode 114. Thank you so much for listening. Talk soon.